Hi, I'm Rahil Philippos, and you are listening to Three Things, the Indian Express News Show. In this episode, we talk about the Manipur Legislative Assembly meeting for the first time since violence broke out in the state on the 3rd of May. We also talk about the Indian government's Rozgar Mela and whether they are a solution to India's unemployment issues. But first, we talk about India and China. On Monday, China released the 2023 edition of its standard map, which shows some sections of Arunachal Pradesh and Aksai Chin as part of the Chinese territory. This obviously created an uproar in India, with leaders like Foreign Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar rejecting the map and reasserting that these territories are very much a part of the Indian territory.
Just by putting out a map claiming territories, some of which are part of India, I think doesn't make that. These are very much part of India. So,
Now, it's important to remember that this is not the first instance of China asserting claims over Indian territories. In the past, the neighboring country has tried to claim Indian territories as their own numerous times, either by publishing their names in Chinese characters or by including them in their maps. However, this latest map comes just a few days after Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping interacted on the sidelines of the BRICS summit. During this conversation, they had discussed the ongoing border standoff in eastern Ladakh, which had started in May 2020 when Chinese troops had transgressed along at least 4 points on the LAC in that region. To know what this means for the relationship between the two neighbors, the Indian Express's Shubhajit Roy joins us in the segment. So Shubhajit, when China says a standard map, could you talk about what exactly it means by that?
So standard map, basically, it's their gold standard. Essentially, if you see that, every government, it comes out with its map, periodically. And that map is sort of the normal standard map, which is based on its perception of its borders. So that is usually done by in India, for example, the Geological Survey of India, it comes out with the India's map. And in China, this is done by the Ministry of Natural Resources, which periodically comes up with its map, which essentially defines its borders.
Right, and we understand that China in its latest edition has included some parts of Arunachal Pradesh and Aksai Chin region in it. Could you give a sense to our listeners of just how often China has done that in the past?
Yeah, so it has always done that in the last, since 1949, when the People's Republic of China was sort of formed by Mao's Communist Party of China under the leadership of Mao Zedong. And they have always come up with their map, which, depict or portray parts of India, which is Arunachal Pradesh, Aksai Chin, Taiwan, and the disputed South China Sea as part of China. And that has been their historical claim, territorial claim that they have made. And India has always rejected those claims. But this is part of the standard practice by China. And it has always made claims over these territories, which may or may not be in physical control of the Chinese government or the Chinese army. So that's how it sort of plays out usually. So every few years, if not every year, the Chinese government, parts of Chinese government, they come up with this standard map. This time it was done by the Ministry of Natural Resources.
Right, and what has India's response been to the standard map this time?
So India has sort of obviously rejected that claim and has also lodged a strong diplomatic protest through the official channels, through the diplomatic channels. And the Indian Ministry of External Affairs, their official spokesperson, he said that we have lodged a strong protest through diplomatic channels with the Chinese side on the so-called 2023 standard map of China that lays claim to India's territory. It also said that it rejects these claims as they have no basis, and it added that such steps by the Chinese side only complicate the resolution of the boundary question. So that has been the Indian government's official response made public through the Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson.
And what is also perhaps significant is that the standard map comes just days after Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping met along the sidelines of the BRICS summit. And we understand that after the meeting, India and China came up with different versions of what happened in the meeting, which of course is not a great sign to begin with. But with this standard map, is it sort of another indicator that our border dispute with China is, well, far from getting resolved?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to bring up to speed, with what you said, you rightly pointed out that, the two statements after the meeting between, or a conversation, as Indians would like to call it, between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping were very different in their sort of takeaway, in their readouts, while Indian government sort of put out that, Prime Minister conveyed India's concerns on the huge troop mobilization along the LAC, and the bilateral relationship cannot continue as business as usual and until the border standoff is resolved. The Chinese obviously take a view that, the border standoff and the border situation and the bilateral relations should be kept separate, while the two should not impact each other. So there are different takeaways, and that was sort of spelled out in the two statements that came out after the conversation between the two leaders. And Jaishankar, the External Affairs Minister, S. Jaishankar, he also came after this map was put out in the public domain. He also spoke at an event, and where he said that China has even in the past put out such maps which claim the territories which are not China's. And he also said that making absurd claims does not make other people's territories yours. So making it very clear that just because this cartographic claims or cannot be justified on the ground. So, but we have to also understand when you talk about the border, negotiation, whether it complicates, what happens is each country puts out its map as per its own perception, so that in the border talks, they can say that this is what that country's map is. Similarly, India also puts out such maps where, it claims whichever it says that the territory which is it, according to India's perception, is part of it. And that has been the normal sort of way where how border negotiations are done, where both sides use their maps to make their or bolster their claims. And so that's how you see that when the two sides, even our prime minister or our defense minister or our foreign ministers, often say in the parliament that there is a difference in perception, and that is what it essentially comes down to, that each side, each government has its perception of its borders, and the Chinese side have their perception. The Indian side feels that is completely incorrect, and it rejects those claims, and it says it also comes out with its map as per India's sort of claim and India's perception.
And next we talk about Manipur. On Tuesday, the Manipur Assembly convened its session for the first time since ethnic clashes broke out in the state on the 3rd of May between the Meiteis and the Kuki tribes. Since then, the state has been grappling with a complete breakdown of law and order. In fact, due to the crisis, the state's legislative assembly couldn't convene during the past 4 months. And so this week, the MLAs in Manipur convened for a one-day session at the assembly. However, that session lasted only 11 minutes, and it did not even address the ongoing violence. This led to strong criticism from the opposition and even from some of the BJP's coalition partners in the state. To know more about the assembly session, my colleague Ucha Sarmin speaks to the Indian Express's Sukrita Barua in this segment.
Sukrita, can you first tell us what was the reason behind convening this one-day session of the assembly?
So the assembly session in Manipur was due to be held, because the last time that the session was held, it concluded on March 3rd. So the constitutional requirement is that there shouldn't be a gap of more than 6 months between the end of one session and the beginning of the next session. That means that the Manipur Assembly needed to convene before September 2nd. So it was due. And the cabinet had already made a recommendation at the start of August to the governor that the assembly be convened on August 21st. But the governor did not do so, which actually set off a lot of alarm bells, because the governor is required to do so. In any case, that day itself, on August 21, the summons for this session was issued. And so the House met on August 29th, as it is required to. And also, given the nature of events that have been unfolding in Manipur since May 3rd, since around July, there's been a lot of clamor among civil society in the valley, amongst the opposition. So the opposition in Manipur is just the Congress. So there was a lot of clamor from their end that the Legislative Assembly should meet to discuss the conflict in Manipur, and that there should be extensive deliberations and that some kind of resolution should be adopted by the Assembly on this matter.
Right, so when the assembly session convened, were there any representatives from the Kuki Zomi community who were attending the session?
See, it was stated earlier by the 10 Kuki Zomi representatives that they would not be able to attend the assembly if it is convened. So that is a stand that they had made clear last month itself, I think. Keep in mind that the Legislative Assembly is located in Manipur's capital, Imphal, which is located in the Meitei-dominated valley. Since violence has taken place, there has been this kind of very firm division in the state where people from either community are not moving into areas which are dominated by the other community. And keep in mind that these MLAs, of these 10 Kuki Zomi MLAs, 8 are from the BJP. And 2 of them are members of the state, are ministers in the state cabinet. And 2 of them are from the Kuki People's Alliance, which had also offered support to the Biren Singh government but withdrew from it recently. So what these MLAs have been underlining is that on May 3rd itself, one of the Kuki Zomi MLAs, Vunzagin Walte, his vehicle had been attacked in Imphal and he was very critically injured and was airlifted to Delhi, and he's been bedridden ever since. So that's something that they've been underlining, that even MLAs were not safe in the capital during the height of the conflict. So they've been citing security reasons as a reason for not being able to attend session.
Right, and Sukrita, we know that the assembly was in session for 11 minutes only. So can you tell us what happened in those 11 minutes?
So on the morning of the assembly, the list of business for the day was issued. And in that, there were just 2 items that were listed. So one was obituary references, and the other was the presentation of a business advisory committee report by the chief minister. So there had been no provision for question hour, no room for private member resolutions, which was something that the Congress had tried to introduce. So, it was very clear that there would not be space for discussion. So right from the beginning, the opposition was going to make noise about it. So the assembly began at 11 a.m. and just as the speaker took his position, Okram Ibobi Singh, who is the Congress legislature party leader, and he's also the former chief minister of Manipur. So he immediately began protesting against the nature of the session, and he was calling it, he was questioning how democratic this nature of a session is and, what was the idea behind it. So that strain of protesting continued for the next 9 minutes. And during that time, the obituary reference was raised. And during that time, Chief Minister Biren Singh also brought up the Chandrayaan mission and, expressed thanks to the Prime Minister and the scientists, and also mentioned the contribution of Manipuri scientists to the mission. So this obviously did not go down well with the opposition. And while they continued protesting, what Biren Singh argued is that matters which are sub judice, matters which are before the court, should not be discussed in assembly. So he said that a separate discussion in the assembly is not required. So by doing so, he made it pretty clear that there was no intent to discuss this issue. So after about 9 minutes of this kind of chaos, the speaker adjourned the House for 30 minutes. And once the House resumed, the opposition MLAs continued protesting, and within 2 minutes, the speaker adjourned the entire session, and that was it.
Right, and we understand that a resolution was also passed by the assembly, but that has also received some criticism from the opposition. Can you talk about what that resolution was?
So, curiously enough, after the session was adjourned, assembly officials released this resolution, which they declared has been passed by the House. It was a pretty standard resolution about working towards peace and harmony in the state. And it said that, the peace is the priority of the state and that the House will work towards resolving differences amongst the people and that it will do so through dialogue and constitutional means. So the resolution itself was pretty straightforward. And this has been questioned by the Congress MLAs, of course, and also some of the BJP's coalition partners who, while speaking to us, they said that this was neither announced in the House, nor was this resolution read out in the House, nor was there any kind of discussion. There was no kind of vote on it. So they questioned what kind of a resolution this was. So this is all that happened during this, what should have been a critical assembly session.
Right, so the Congress and the BJP's coalition partners were not happy with how the session went. In fact, they also raised some concerns over how the session was convened in the first place. Talk to us about what they have said about how all of this went down.
So the Congress MLAs had questioned the manner in which the House had been convened, because according to the rules of procedures of the Assembly, when the governor issues the summons, it should be with a 15-day notice. So the summons should be issued 15 days before the start of the Assembly session. But in this case, the summons was issued on August 21st and the Assembly was to convene on August 29th. So they kind of questioned what the nature of the Assembly session is, given that it was short notice. So was it an emergency session? Was it a special session? But it wasn't, right? It was convened as a normal Assembly session. One of the NPP MLAs, so NPP is one of the coalition partners of the BJP in Manipur, and it's also a part of the larger Northeast Democratic Alliance and the NDA at a national level. So one of those MLAs told us that even the list of business which was issued, it's supposed to be issued at least the previous day, but it was issued just before the session began. So even the BJP's coalition partner MLAs were in the dark and they didn't know just how truncated this session was going to be. So these kind of questions have been raised about the nature of this session.
And do we know how did the state government react to these concerns?
Right, so after the assembly adjourned, some of the ministers convened a press meet. So in that, interestingly enough, one of the ministers, who is Govindas Konthujam, he kind of held the Congress responsible for the fact that the crisis in the state was not discussed in the House. And he said that, because of their, I quote, unconstitutional and unruly behavior, it was because of this behavior that the House missed an opportunity to deliberate on the issue in the state. And that, if they wouldn't have behaved in this manner, then the House would have been able to discuss the issue. And they said that, all that the Congress seems to want is president's rule in the state, and they don't want the state government to function. So that has been the state government's reaction to how things went down in the assembly.
And in the end, we talk about Rozgar Mela. On Monday, Prime Minister Narendra Modi distributed 51,000 appointment letters to newly inducted recruits in various government posts during a Rozgar Mela, which translates to employment fair. When we spoke to the Indian Express's Udit Mishra, he told us why the government decided to organize it.
Last year, there was a growing consensus that unemployment was an issue which the government had to tackle. Some of the readers and listeners might even recall that people in the RSS had also highlighted the concerns on unemployment. And the Prime Minister had decided that over the next 18 months, the government will fill up around 10 lakh vacancies in all kinds of government jobs. So for this purpose, for filling up these vacancies, the Rozgar Melas were started. These are employment fairs, and basically these are pre-existing vacancies which are being filled. And on Monday, the Prime Minister distributed 51,000 appointment letters as part of the latest edition of the Rozgar Mela.
Now, during this fair, the Prime Minister addressed the new recruits over a video conference, where he said that the Indian economy was on the path of rapid growth and that it had created lots of opportunities for employment among the youth.
भारत का विकास सिर्फ नंबर की रेस नहीं है। इस विकास का भारत के हर नागरिक के जीवन पर प्रभाव पड़ेगा। इसका मतलब है कि बड़ी संख्या में रोजगार के अवसर तैयार हो रहे हैं और इससे
Now, while employment fairs like these might seem like a good idea, experts have pointed out that they are not a solution to India's unemployment crisis, which has been afflicting the country's youth for the past 5 years. To know more about this issue, here is Ucha again speaking to Udit in this segment.
So, Udit, a lot has been said about unemployment in India. Just before the elections in 2019, we came to know that unemployment in India hit a 45-year high. And during COVID also, we saw this crisis worsening. But what would you say is the current situation of unemployment in India?
Yeah, so I think, there is a broad picture that emerges whether one looks at the periodic labor force survey, which is the so-called official survey, and the CMIE data, which is the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy data. The CMIE data is more updated. The PLFS data typically comes with considerable lag. But broadly, the story is that, after a historic high in 2017-18, the situation hasn't totally turned around, and it's not the case that we've solved the unemployment problem. There is still continuing stress in the economy when it comes to unemployment. The PLFS data shows that perhaps the situation has improved a bit. CMIE still considers that its surveys show that there is considerable stress. But broadly, the picture is that much of the improvement also is only in the shape of self-employment. People taking up very low value jobs like a taxi driver or, astrologers and all of that. And so there is considerable stress, and the estimates vary between 20 million to 200 million in terms of the new jobs that are required to address the unemployment challenge that India is facing right now.
And you have pointed out in your pieces that this unemployment has affected the country's youth disproportionately and that there is a significant rise of unemployment among the youth. Can you tell us why that is the case?
Yeah, so this is not terribly clear, but evidence is that bulk of our unemployed people are in the youth category. And within the youth also, we find that unemployment levels are higher for people with higher educational attainment. So if you have a PhD, then the unemployment level among PhDs is far more than the unemployment level amongst those who have just completed class 10th education. And that may have a lot to do with the mismatch between the skills we are getting at higher education levels and what the market wants. If the market needs a particular kind of skill and you are not getting that, even though you are getting educated at a higher level in some other field, then there is a mismatch. So I think this points to a larger human resource management problem at a country level. And for that, we'll have to go back to the drawing board to figure out why is it that all the people coming out from our colleges and universities are failing to get these jobs, or why aren't they skilled enough to hold on to new jobs?
And so are Rozgar Mela supposed to be a solution to this unemployment crisis?
Well, it doesn't look like a solution to India's unemployment problem for a variety of reasons. But to begin with, the 10 lakh jobs that we are talking about, even if all of them were filled before the coming elections in 2024, 10 lakh is a very small amount in comparison to the total number of jobs that are required to address the unemployment problem. As I mentioned earlier, that anywhere between 20 million to 200 million jobs are required. So these 10 lakh are not, they're just like a drop in that ocean. Moreover, these 10 lakhs are not new jobs. These are pre-existing vacancies. So people had left these jobs and they were not filled up. And what makes it even worse is that these are public sector jobs, and India's public sector employment as a proportion of the population is one of the lowest in comparable countries. So India maybe has 16 people in public employment per 1,000 people in the country. In Brazil, it would be around 111 per 1,000 people of the population. So, India has fairly low levels of public employment to begin with. So filling pre-existing vacancies, that to just 10 lakhs when the total demand would be anywhere between 2 crores to 20 crores doesn't sound like a solution to me.
Right, so India needs to create more jobs to address this concern, and not only in public sector but also in the private sector. But we understand that job creation has proved to be quite a challenging task for India, right?
Yeah, so the first thing to note is that, government per se cannot provide all the jobs because India is a huge country, and the scale at which jobs are required, the government simply cannot employ everybody. But the government is definitely charged with the responsibility to create an enabling environment so that the economy itself creates new jobs in the private sector in particular. Now, the trouble has been that typically for a developing economy, manufacturing sector creates a lot of these jobs. But in India, manufacturing sector has remained fairly muted. Its growth has been fairly muted. And we have largely gone from a agrarian economy to a services-led economy. And we sort of never saw our manufacturing sector really blossom and sort of soak up the excess labor. So the focus has been across the board. Most experts agree that, we have to somehow find ways to boost our manufacturing. And that too, within that framework also, we should not just focus on any kind of manufacturing. We should focus on labor-intensive manufacturing, which basically means the kind of manufacturing that employs a lot of labor, because we have excess labor. So that is our comparative advantage. That is where we are better than the rest of the world. So we must figure out ways to invest in our labor force, see it as human capital, focus on the small and medium sized sectors because they create a lot more employment for the same amount of GDP. So, those are the kind of changes we need to have in policy to create more jobs.
And Udit, if this trend continues, what kinds of challenges will India be faced with going forward?
So, the thing with being a young economy is that we are, we've got a much better growth rate than the rest of the world. And it tends to happen when an economy is really trying to fulfill its potential. But we have seen in the last 2 decades that our potential growth rate, the kind of growth rate at which GDP growth rate at which we can grow without, fueling inflation has come down from something around 8% to 6%. And now most economists, most people who are even bullish on India think that 5 to 6% is what India would grow at. It has to be understood that when we talk about economic growth for a young economy like India, we often say that, that is our resource, but it would be a resource when that population is productive. If that same population, if that young population is not able to get jobs, if it's not able to be productive, then that will create a drag on the overall size of the economy. It will not, we may not be able to grow as fast. And moreover, it will create social unrest. So this is increasingly being seen as a fault line in India's economy, this high youth unemployment. And a lot of people think that this is a downside risk of investing into India. This is a more medium-term thing. It's not something that may trigger something in 6 months' time, but over a medium to long term, high youth unemployment is a matter of considerable concern.
You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was hosted by me, Rahil Philippos. It was written and produced by Ucha Sarmin and Shashank Bhargav. It was edited and mixed by Abhishek Kumar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone who you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at @expresspodcast and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.